Yeah, we're live. I can see everyone. So I'm late, 7:27 right now. What I was trying to do is I set a goal for today to get my video up on the 900 horsepower big block Chevy combos we have before I started the live feed, and I'm a man of my word to myself, even to myself. So I got it finished and got it up posted just recently, and so now I'm coming here at 27 minutes after doing the live feed. Well, that's up, and you guys can sneak over, take a look at, do dual screens, all kinds of crazy stuff. But on the 900 horsepower big block thing, there's cool stuff because I ran a 565-inch big block naturally aspirated motor with a Wilson ported tunnel ram and airflow research heads and a big roller cam. Although it didn't have high compression, it was only 10.5 to 1 because I like doing the dual purpose motors for the dyno so that I could run boost on them and all kinds of stuff. So that one worked out really well. And then the other one was a 496-inch stroker that did, was made good power, mid high 600s. And then we added a 671 supercharger on that and ran it at different boost levels. And then the last one was a Gen 6 Junkyard 454 with heads, cam, and intake. And then two cheap eBay GT45 turbo, eBay, wherever you can get them everywhere. Two GT45 turbos. And then we just ran enough boost to push it up to 900 horsepower. And that was obviously all fairly easy. So making 900 horsepower, obviously the most difficult thing is the NA version, but at 565 inches, and when you have enough head flow and you've got a good intake manifold and two dominators on that stuff, really that combination with a few tweaks to it could probably be a lot closer to, if not reach 1,000 horsepower with enough static compression. So that would be a good combination. Although it gets harder and harder to do with standard valve angle heads. If you do a 20-degree head like the Brodix, or I think Airflow Research has some also, if you do those altered valve angle heads, they flow a lot more, and usually you can make more power. They obviously take dedicated pistons and valve train stuff. I think a lot of those heads probably have to have shaft rockers like the Jessel stuff. I've never run any of those 20-degree heads. They run a lot of those at West Tech, but I've never put them together a motor with them. The heads that I had on here on this 565 were Airflow Research 357s, I think. So they flowed like 425 or 430. So they were doing pretty well. So we made good power given the flow numbers. If you multiply that out, we were looking at, let's see, 44 divided by 425. So we were at 2.22 horsepower per CFM. So it was fairly efficient, pretty good for a wet sump motor and stuff. Again, not real high compression, only 10.5 to 1. I like to be in that range rather than being up a little bit higher. Brule calls the like 11.5, 12 to 1 in that range. He calls that like no man's land. He said either do a 10 to 1 motor, or if you're going to put compression in it and enough compression where you have to run like race gas, and he said then just put compression in it. Make it a 14 to 1 motor. Make it all kinds of compression in it. If you're gonna, it's gonna be a dedicated, NA motor, and that's exactly right. And then if you were gonna do that, then you start going to the other steps. Especially if a guy that had something like this, that kind of tunnel ram on there, you'd have, you could put bigger heads on it, and you could put more camshaft in it. This was a pretty healthy cam. It was an 800 lift cam, not radical by any means. And again, low compression. It did very well. I was very happy with it. It took a fairly extensive dyno session to get it up to that power level. Started out, I thought something was definitely wrong with the motor when we first started, but we kept whittling away at it, and finally it got up to where it was making, it made 944 horsepower, so it did really well. Tonight we're going to talk about blaming the tune. so we'll start, and I'll get a poll going. This will be a simple one. Is the tune always to blame? So we'll see how that goes. So for those that are not familiar with this, I'm a lot of the guys that are here for the live feed probably are. One of the big things, and the poor guys at West Tech like Ish and Eric get this kind of stuff all the time. They get guys that bring their cars in for the first time or bring them in again because after it gets tuned and then they go drive it around and somehow the tune falls out of it. Like my favorite meme is the kid riding the bike, and then puts the stick in the spoke, and he wrecks, and then the stick's laying on the ground. And stupid tune. I don't know why, that just gets to me. It just shows the level of what's going on. So the tunes fall out of them. You know, and we see this all the time. We also see it on the engine dyno. They see it on the chassis dyno a lot, that guys will have problems with, and this is very common on the chassis dyno, they'll have problems with their fuel system. So they don't have enough pump, or they have a clogged filter, or they don't have enough line, or big enough injectors, or whatever. And it's like, it's always the tune problem. It's always the guy, you know, it's always the guy doing this. Well, why can't you tune around that? Well, because you don't have your stuff together. You put your fuel pump that's not big enough anyway in a rusty old piece of junk gas tank that's full of stuff that's clogging it up, and your sock isn't stopping everything. And then also the filter, the second filter that you have that's not the sock on the pump, between the filter and the injectors, that's also clogged. You know, they just go through all sorts of things. And again, it's always that it's not a simple like thing where you have the air fuel at, you know, 12.8 and you have, you know, 30 degrees of timing or whatever. Because as I've shown before in these tunes, because I've shown demonstrations in these videos of what happens when we change the tune. And I did this with Freiberger on Engine Masters, where we went from, you know, near 13-to-1 down to 9-to-1 on an NA motor, and showed how much power that is. So if you were that far off, like I think we went up, I don't know, 30 or 40 jet sizes or something. We went from 70s to 100s or something, just to use two random numbers, basically. But we changed it a lot. So we went all the way into the 9s, and you still don't lose that much power. I mean, you are going to lose some, but the thing still ran, and it still went to wide open throttle, and it still did all that stuff. So you can be off by a lot, you know, off by your tune, and it still works. And then the same thing, the timing took big chunks of power out of it. But the thing is, even when I think we went down to 10 degrees or something on the timing from where it wanted to be, like, let's say 35 or something, because this was like a conventional small block or something. And so they stripped a lot of timing out of it, and it lost a ton of power. It lost 100 or 150 horsepower or something. But again, it lost a lot of power, but it still ran. I mean, it still works. The exhaust glow is a little bit more extravagant with no timing in it, but it still works. It shows when all the other things are right, like, you know, when you have a loose rocker or a broken spring or a flat camshaft or a bent push rod or a broken piston, or, you know, there's lots of things that are mechanical things that can go wrong that people immediately blame. They look over at the guy doing this. Oh, what did you do? Well, I didn't do anything. Well, you had to have done something, because now it's not running right. I know it's not running right. And you walk, because all Brule has to do is just walk by the dyno. So he's like, oh yeah, number 7 rocker's loose. I don't know how he does that, but that kind of thing is that you can't tune around that. You can't, you know, if you've got a broken spring, no amount of timing and air fuel is going to fix that. But the first thing that you blame always is that, hey, look, what's going on with the tune? I don't know. It has 30 degrees of timing in it, like it's supposed to, and the air fuel is right. So the nice thing about some of those problems is, especially if it was right to begin with and then it went bad, you'll normally see, this is assuming that you have the air fuel meter on the right side. If you only have it on one side and it breaks on the other side, then you don't see it. You don't see a change in air fuel. But if you have two of them, one on both sides, or it's on the right side, and you lose a rocker, you know, you kick a rocker off, or a spring breaks or whatever, then normally you'll see that in the air fuel. And so you can see the change. But we've had it happen a lot that the motor loses power and it doesn't show on the meter, because a lot of times we'll run the O2 sensor just in one header. And we don't always run 802s on everything. Most of the time we don't. On real high horsepower stuff they do, and stuff that's, you know, high dollar stuff, and they do that. On my junkyard motors, I don't, very rarely do I do that. I've done that a few times when I was doing tuning specific things, like in the video where I did, I was measuring full sequential with individual cylinder trimming, because we had a single plane intake manifold on there. So I wanted to see how even the air fuel was on the individual cylinders, because on a single plane intake manifold, you got 4 long outers, you've got 4 long inners. Even if everything was perfect, they're going to have changing fuel needs as we go up in RPM because of the runner length, and irrespective of what the flow difference is. But what happens is those things want different amounts of fuel. And with a carburetor, you can't individualize that. But with port injection, that's the nice thing, is you can go in and say, hey, look, these 3 runners or this 1 runner or whatever it is, because it's not even 4 and 4, as I found out. Some of them are different. So, but the nice thing is you can go in and go, hey, look, that one's 14-1, that one's 11-1. We want them all to be 12.5 or 12.8. Okay, well, we can make them that. And not only can we make them that, we can make them that at every RPM range. So when the thing loads in at 2,500 or whatever, and the signal's bad, what on a single plane intake normally to the carburetor, on fuel injection, it doesn't care. It's like, I'm going to supply the amount of fuel that I want to supply. Because I have individual cylinder trims now on a true sequential system, I can make the air fuel be perfect at every combination of load and RPM and all that. And then I compared that to just batch fire, just, doing side to side, and then compared that to a carburetor, all with the same intake manifold. And that's a big, and for that, I needed 802s because we needed to see what the difference is. The other thing that can affect what's going on with the 802s or what's happening with the fuel needs in that cylinder is the scavenging from the header. So if the header is different side to side or runner to runner, that also can affect it because if the length of the primary pipe on the header is different, they're not all even, especially on street headers. And then also that combines with the intake runner not being even. So you get a big variance in what the thing wants. And like I said, because they're longer and shorter, the way that their particular fuel needs during the RPM range is different just because of that. And for other reasons, as I just mentioned too. So that's very cool on tuning and being able to do that. But the thing when I did that test is I was very disappointed in how little power I gained from that. Because, you put a carburetor on there and we know that makes good power on a single plane intake because it cools the charge air and you get gains from that compared to running. So the carburetor makes more power than the batch fire does on the single plane intake because the batch fire doesn't have, it's injecting the fuel down at the port. So it doesn't have as much time to cool it. You get more charge cooling in it. And normally what happens is the carburetor makes more power. If you were to put a throttle body injection and tune it, you could probably make as much power as the carburetor, maybe even more if you've got the tune really, really good on it. The problem is you can't do individual cylinder trims with a throttle body injection on top. You are putting fuel in, so you get charge cooling, but you can't get the individual port. The ideal combination would be to put enough into the top and do individual port tuning so that you could have the best of both worlds. And that was tried one time at Westech, and I don't think that they were very successful at it. I think more because of the application that they were trying to do it on. But I think that would be cool. And that's a test I'd like to do again. I'd like to revisit later on. I'd like to see if we could get all the charge cooling offered by a carburetor or the, fuel supplied throttle body injection on the top, and then also trim that cylinder to cylinder. Hopefully we wouldn't have to trim very much cylinder to cylinder. We could just do a little bit there. So, but we'll see. I do want to try that. I have that on my list of things that I want to try. One of the things that I wanted to mention regarding tune is that, and this is why you can't take because I get guys asking all the time, hey, Richard, can you tune my stuff? First of all, no, I'm not a tuner. You don't want me doing it. The next thing is, well, can I just have your tune from the chassis for the engine dyno? No, I'm not going to give you that either because I'm not going to be responsible for blowing your motor up, and more than likely what I have in there might do that. Only because when I run on the engine dyno, unless I go and interpolate all the stuff just to make the graph look good, which I don't care about, I'm only tuning for like idle and then the transition as I roll in. Let's say we're starting the run at 2,500 RPM. So the thing's idling at, and again, I don't even care about the idle quality. I just care that it idles. So if it has to idle at 1,000 RPM, again, I'm testing wide open throttle stuff. So I don't spend all day trying to optimize parts of the tune that are not important to me, because the important part is for me to get the testing done. I have to get, I've got to get the tune to get the thing right under wide open throttle for the RPM range that I want to running it in. I need to dial that in, and then I need to change the 10 camshafts or whatever. So the way that the thing idles, unless idle is part of the story, I don't really care about that. So I get the thing to idle. I get it to transition from that idle as we go up to wide open throttle, as we go from whatever kPa it is, 20, 30, 40, whatever it is, up to 100 kPa if it's an NA motor, and then it just goes right across the top 2 or 3 cells, depending on what exact map sensor we have in there and how it's scaled. But it goes across the top. All I need to do is change those as okay, this one's 11.8, this one's 12.2, this one's, okay, now it's all even though a lot of times when I do that, I change it from 12.2 to 12.8, and it says, oh, that's all nice, and now your curve is nice and flat, but it did nothing to power. The power curve's just overlay. That happens a lot. In fact, on an LS motor, that happens more times than not. So you could go ahead and do that, but then all the rest of the stuff, all the decel stuff, all of the modifier, I turn all that stuff off. So I don't do any of that. It's not that I can't. It's just that it's a time crunch for me. So I got to get stuff done. And a lot of times I'll even start with an existing tune, and we might then scale it for something else, for a bigger size injector, bigger motor, or whatever. But I can have a file from a 5.3 and I can put that in for a 6.0. Even if it has a different injector, it will start up and run. So it can be off that, for your tune can be off that far. It will start up and run. If I can just walk in and spray carb cleaner in there and the thing will fire up, that's how far off you can be on your tune and have it still work. But what I wanted to get into as I went on a tirade there is that the other thing that's different, in addition to me not wanting to supply that kind of tune because it does people no good, is also that one of the differences when we do a test on an engine dyno that you guys nobody would experience really on the street, is that when we go and load the thing at 2,500 or 3,000 RPM, wherever we're starting the motor at, we do a stationary load. So when I'm tuning it, and it's more critical really for me for the timing curve, since the motor really never sees a stationary load like that, what I do is I take timing out there. Because on the load in part where we go to load in and the engine, draws the thing down to the 3,000 RPM starting point, you don't experience that anywhere on the street. That never happens. So what I do is I'll take timing away there, and then when it releases, then if I have, usually there's less timing at 100 kPa at 2,500 RPM anyway, and then there would be more at the power peak. There's always more timing there because of RPM. So there's going to be less timing there than probably there would be on the street, because if you saw that RPM and 100 kPa at that RPM, you would transition through that much faster than I do on the engine dyno on the initial stationary load. So you could get away with a lot more timing. The other thing that happens on boosted applications quite often is, like, normally what I'll do on boosted applications, I like to run the motor naturally aspirated to start out with. I like to make sure that the motor's safe and happy and we don't have any, tune problems like broken springs or push rods or rock arms or whatever, flat cams, whatever they are. So I run it NA and make sure that it works. I then have a fairly good idea on what the fueling needs are at 100 kPa. Then all I have to do is I just copy and paste that all the way up to 200 kPa for running 14.7 pounds of boost or less, and then double that and then interpolate that in between those two. And I get a really, really good chance of being pretty close on the fuel needs for that thing. On the timing needs, though, and that's kind of the thing that I wanted to talk about here, is on the timing needs of that thing. Obviously, if we're running, let's say we're running 29 degrees of total timing at 98 kPa, close to 100 kPa on the NA version. Depending on how you have your cells set up, if we're going to 200 kPa, they're going to go up in increments, whatever you're filling out there for your increments, how precise you want to get in between those, and how many cells you have available to you also are going to determine what that split is. But, let's say that you go up to 110, 120, 130, 140, on up, and there are that many cells. You have to figure out what's the breakdown of the number of, how much boost is going up for each one. So what is the first cell? How big of a jump in boost in that? And then how much timing do I need to take away for that 1 or 2 pounds? And then for the next one, and then for the next one, and then the next one. a lot of times when I transition on the engine dyno anyway, when I transition from, this is especially true on a turbo. So if I'm going to load the motor up at 3,000 RPM and it's going to be making boost, it will have a lot less timing there, and even transitioning through as it goes through there, I'll take a whole bunch of timing away, even at 1 or 2 pounds, even at whatever the next increment is up above my NA power. And oftentimes I'll even take timing away at the 98 or 100 kPa. I'll take timing out of the NA thing again, just to make it safe as it transitions through there, which I would never do out on the street or at the track, because that would help the thing spool up. The way that we load it, again, gives it an artificial thing. So when it gets to that load point, let's say that that's 8 pounds of boost at 3,000 RPM and is hovering in that cell or 2 cells or whatever, it has enough time to be at the timing level that you're specifying there. I don't need the transition through there because I'm not transitioning in a gear as I'm doing that. That would be very beneficial to have more timing there. And again, in a car, on a chassis dyno, or out on the street or at the track, you'd be transitioning through that so much faster. It would never be any kind of stationary load. So it would be a lot safer to possibly have more timing in there. And that's not something that I do on the engine dyno. So there are big differences between what, and there are more obviously too, but that's the big difference between having the tune there and then having it on the chassis dyno or on the engine dyno. I'm just looking for, on the NA one, I'm just looking for the wide open throttle, 100 or 98 or whatever kPa going across, from 2,000 RPM to 6,500 RPM. And then boost is a little different. If I'm running the same amount of boost, then, and it's a turbo, we'll spool up to some point, and then hopefully if I have the electronic boost controller on there, that will also be fairly flat. A lot of times it's not. If you have a small turbo on there, maybe it'll spool up and then it'll fall off, but like almost all factory turbos do. Or if it's a centrifugal blower, maybe it'll start out at 2 pounds and you can have a lot more timing there. It'll start off at 2 pounds and then it'll rise up and it'll transition at a diagonal up to whatever the highest boost level is at the highest RPM. So you have different, and that's where we graduate this. So you graduate you decrease the amount of timing that you have with each step up in boost, and also you decrease the amount of timing that you have with each step down in RPM. So if you have lots of boost at very low RPM, it's possible to have negative timing numbers there. If you could get your motor to spool up and make 25 pounds at 1,000 RPM on a gas motor, you might have negative 15 degrees of timing there. I don't know if that's a real number, but I certainly have seen single digit numbers, and it can go all the way down to 0. I know I've seen 0 numbers on some factory boosted stuff at way low engine speeds. I don't ever get into that because I'd never load a turbo motor at 1,000 RPM or really even 1,500 RPM. I don't think I ever have. We may have loaded it low because it was not making any boost there and then released it and then had it come up. And if it's doing that, we might also play with timing a little bit, because as it's transitioning at a rate of 300 RPM per second. Again, that rate may differ on the street. More than likely, yours would be faster than that in a car. But it would not be the stationary load. So speed of the big block stuff. So there's a lot of cool stuff in there, including running twin GT45 turbos on the junkyard 6-liter, which needs to be the Big Bang motor. The other thing I'm thinking about on that Big Bang big block is, and I've never done it yet, and I want to, and the guys offered it way back when COVID was first starting. The guys from Compressor Superchargers said, "Hey, can we run with you on something, on one of your motors? We want to do our thing." They did it with Jeff Smith way back, but I was talking to them about trying to beat the 6-liter LS Big Bang number, the 1580 number. I wouldn't do it on that motor again because I don't think that motor is capable of doing that. It's leaking water, and I don't think I would do that. I would get a different one. But maybe I'll talk to them about doing it on the big block and see, because then if the big block beats the LS, then all the big block guys will be happy. And if it did it with a compressor or supercharger setup, because what I want to see is how low the charge temperatures are. So if we can get charge temperatures that are below 0, we might be able to make like a 1,500 horsepower number starting with a 500 horsepower number, we might be able to make it at like, I don't know, 15 or 20 pounds or something, because I saw the gains that they were getting. They were doubling the power output of the small block that they had there at like 7 pounds. So it's really impressive stuff. And it's very, very safe. I mean, they're running full NA timing on these things. It was really impressive. So I'd kind of like to try that. And I want to see if I can, because I've never tested it, and I'd kind of like to see if we could get that running, and that would be kind of cool. So let's see what you guys got going on. Rob, hi Richard, a question in relation to the supercharger parasitic drive from yesterday. What do you think makes up the biggest proportion of loss in relation to either the boost pressure versus the RPM? I don't know what you're talking about. It's a pump, like a water pump, and it's doing work. It's processing air just like a big paddle wheel or a vane or whatever, and or think about it as a boat impeller or a propeller. So it takes load for that to process water from one side of the blade to the other to push it through. It takes, and the greater the RPM that you're spinning, and the greater amount of air that it's processing, because that's drag against the rotor. So the more that it's processing, the greater the drive loss that's going to be required to do that work. It's just work, and all requires power. Yeah, everybody hit the like button. Come on. I'm matrixing the camera. What's going on? Can you port the intake manifold to balance out the flow, especially on 5 and 7 runners on Smallwood Chevys? No, it's not a flow thing. Like the one that I was talking about was a single plane intake. This one was on a Ford application that we were doing it on, or even on LS. It's the same thing. When you have the way that they position the carburetor is kind of central in the intake manifold. And so you have 4 long runners that go out and 4 that are short. It really doesn't matter that you made them flow the same. They might already. I don't remember flowing the manifold to see, because just the runner length itself is not the only thing that's going to dictate flow. So if you were to port them and make them flow the same, there's the reflected wave is still going to be different, and there's still going to, that cylinder is still going to make a different amount of power as we go through the RPM range, and require, not surprisingly, a different amount of fuel as it goes through that. It's not just flow. Justin, 5.3 L59 sloppy stage 2. What valve springs do you run? You need to run something that will allow a 600 lift cam. There's lots of springs out there. There's beehive springs that will allow that. There's dual springs that will allow that. Lots of different ones. In a previous video, you mentioned with nitrous, sometimes a smaller throttle body may work better than a big one. I don't remember. I think if I think back, the point that I was making is that as you go up in nitrous flow, you go down in airflow for the motor. So the nitrous displaces the airflow. So to make the same amount of power with nitrous, your throttle body size would theoretically be smaller, or your carburetor size would theoretically be smaller. Do ported heads and better intake manifold make much of a difference in a boosted application, or would that money be spent elsewhere? You have to tell me which application that is. On some applications, yes. Like on the 2.2 liter Dodge, to get like serious power numbers, it's going to need a big camshaft. It's going to need ported heads. It's going to need an intake manifold. It's going to need everything. Same thing like with a 5 liter Ford. You can get what I call percentage gains. So, but if you're starting out with not very much power and you double it, you just have twice as much as not very much. So now you have a little bit, whatever that number is. So if you, for instance, on a 5 liter Ford, if you have a 260 horsepower motor and you run 14.7 pounds of boost, now you have 520 horsepower, which is not a lot. When you add 14.7 pounds of boost to a 400 horsepower motor, now you have 800. So all of those things add up to help. and that all works. That math all usually works. But the flip side of that is if you have an LS, I wouldn't do ported heads, and I wouldn't put a ported intake manifold on it. I would put a cam and springs and then put a turbo on it, because those already flow enough to make lots of power, especially with the cam. And then you can make, 1,000 or more pretty easily without doing any of those. 799 heads or 317 heads with 91 octane 5.3 with a turbo. I don't think I would put 317 heads on it, but you can try that. I think you're not going to be happy with the off boost stuff. I just don't know which one of those is going to work better with the 91 octane being the detonation limit. I honestly don't know. Oh, James, Richard, what are you trying to test? You said something about negative inlet temps. You froze for a second and we missed something. The compressed air supercharger that the guys it's the guys that used to own NOS. They have a compressed air supercharger, and you'll have charge temperatures that are in the negative numbers. Turbo Monza, what's going on? The electronic boost controller we run is a TC1, but I think I want to try out the Turbo Smart ones. Twice as much is not very much. That's right. I have an intercooler with a 4x8x24 with 3-inch inlets and outlets. Will it flow enough for a small block Chevy? Yes. It's 4 inches by 8 inches by 24 inches. That doesn't seem very big. You need a chili bomb. You're blowing out the valve cover gaskets on a ProCharge LS1. Then you got a lot to blow by somewhere, right? Or you have you're pressurizing the crankcase, possibly. Doesn't have to be blow by. It could be from another line going over there. Do you have a PCV hooked up to the intake manifold still? You can get AC to get really cold water, air to water temps. Yeah, but not like this. In the 14.7 horsepower doubling math, is that the same thing? 30 degrees NA timing and 30 degrees at 14.7. You don't need the same timing to double the power. Richard, do you change injector timing or dwell time for coils? On the dwell time, I usually put it at 4 or 4.5. That's just kind of the standard thing that we do. And we've played with injector timing occasionally, but I just haven't seen it do very much. When I was doing the sequential stuff, we played with Eric came in and we were playing with injector timing, and we tried swinging it, and it just didn't seem to make any big power changes. Dan, yeah, Dodge uses the HVAC system for their Demon stuff. Thanks, y'all. Sorry, no content or updates will be coming this week on the 3800 head less. My buddy will flow them. It's all right, man. Don't worry about it. That's not going to run until you're done. Somebody else do a dyno test with the length and shape of individual runners. This influenced the power curve, the medium trumpet shape. So all of the testing that's up on this channel with changes in runner length don't count. On the LS3 valve covers, they have that PCV. There's small opening in the valve cover with some sort of valve in it. We always take those off when we run them on the dyno. I have my V3 SI up and running here soon on the heads cam and intake LS1. That'll be good. I ran Vortex stuff on LS1s way back when that was the only LS style motor that I had, and it worked really good. Richard, do you prefer HP tuners or EFI Live software? I don't use either one of those. I only use Holly HP or Dominator, or I've used Fast and the MS3 Pro stuff now. I don't use any of the factory ECUs. One of the Porsche GT2 RSs uses a water spray on the intercooler. That's cool. We don't run the PCV on a turbo engine, Eric, and if they did, if it's on the pressure side, they're going to have a valve in it, and if it's on the inlet side going into the turbo, that wouldn't be unusual. I'm curious about idle spark control in P&D terms. Yeah, Dan, we used to bring one of those bug sprayers. We brought them to Bonneville all the time to get the salt off, but also they work really good when we were running World Challenge to help the thing cool down. And when I was doing US touring also, and we only had to use it one time when the thing was running hot, and they yelled at me for driving fast through the pits and through the paddock because I was driving around in circles to try to keep airflow through there because the fan died. So I was trying to get, airspeed. What's a good all-out camshaft for big block Chevy with LS7 pistons with enough piston to valve clearance? I don't know. I don't know what heads you have on there. I don't know what your available piston to valve clearance is. I don't know what those will take. I don't ever remember running a set of the LS7 pistons. I think that those were like 12.5 to 1 or something. James, can you not hear me? Mike, do you have any recommendations for learning tuning? Yeah, there's lots of stuff online. You could just, if you search for it on YouTube, there's lots of like guys that are good at it and good at teaching it. Charles, James, your typing comes in loud and clear. Check. Doing a typing check. Start a tuning class. I'm not the guy to do that. There's lots of good guys out there that do that. Yeah, EFI University, Ben's really good. You pay $400 for a dongle or spend $200. My favorite starting point is Advanced Tuning by Greg Banish. Yeah, and the thing is, you're not going to learn tuning overnight. And I'm lucky because I got Eric and Ish now, and I had Tom before that and Ernie before that. And I just learned it out of necessity just so that I didn't have to wait for somebody else to come in and do it. And And like I said, the stuff that I'm doing is so it's just so simple, even I can do it, that all I'm doing is, if the motor starts and runs, then all the rest of it's fairly easy. All I have to do is like, start loading it. And if it's lean, just add fuel to it. That's just this. It's really simple. And a lot of times I just highlight everything and then add a bunch of fuel. And then just as long as I can get a starting point where the thing rolls in, then I can start addressing individual stuff. And I always start with very, very low timing. So that will never hurt anything. So if I can load it and it's in the 11s, let's say on an NA motor, okay, that's fine. That's close enough. That's close enough. And load it at, what we'll do is load it at a few different points at, 2,500, 3,500, 4,500. Okay, look, it looks like it's going to transition. It's going the right direction. So now we can go ahead. Let's make a short run from 2,500 to 4,500. Oh yeah, look, it's like 11.5, 11.8, whatever. Okay, we can go ahead and tune that really quick. And then I just go, okay, now let's, instead of going to 4,500, let's go to 55 and let's go to 65. And then obviously I'm on the stick. So if I see it go, oh yeah, it's like 12.2, 12.2, oh, 13.8. And then I just let off the throttle. It's not going to hurt it like that because it's not there long enough. But then we go in and go, oh, look, what's going on there? Why is it doing that? Did it just come on the cam? Did we lose an exhaust section or something? What happened there? And then we'll go and adjust that. That sort of thing very rarely happens where you will get a big change based on what we're doing there. And then we just start going up in RPM. And then okay, look, it's all in the 11s. It's all in the 12s. Now it's all perfectly flat if that's what you want. Like I said, if it's 12.2 and then 12.5 and then 12.8 or whatever, and then you make it all exactly 12.75 so that I remember talking to the tuners, to Ernie and Tom and Eric, and said, look, I want that thing to be 12.8 the whole way there. I don't want it to vary at all. I don't even want to have it vary in temp. And they make it do that. And it just doesn't do anything to the power curve. It just makes me feel better that there's no change. It's like rock steady. It's just more time. It doesn't, like I said, if it's 12.5 and then 12.7 and 12.8 and 12.9, and you bring up the air fuel curve and it looks jaggedy, especially given that's the scale that you're looking at is only 0.3. So these look like big sweeps. Oh, that's a terrible, the tuner guys will say, oh, that's a terrible, that thing's all over the place. It's not all over the place. It's 0.3 of an air fuel point. And then you go in and make it perfectly flat. Because especially if you go into the big map on the Holly, you can go and whittle away and make it exactly perfectly flat. So it doesn't vary at all. It takes a little bit of work and time and effort. You can do that. And then when you do that and you overlay the two power curves, you're like, that's exactly the same. It didn't even vary by 1 horsepower. That's why I don't do that stuff a lot anymore. What I will do when I'm tuning is, let's say that it's 12.2. Okay, it's all 12.2-ish. I'm going to add a bunch of fuel and I'm going to make it 11.8. Okay, now I'm going to take away a bunch of fuel. Instead of 12.2, I'm going to make it all 12.7. And what I'm looking for are trends. Like that's not my tuning method. I just want to look, if I make a big change, if I change it by half an air fuel point, did it like that or did it not like that? If it didn't change at all, you're like, okay, well, it's not responding to that kind of change in air fuel. And so there's no reason for me to go to 13.5 or 14.5. If it didn't gain power there, then there's no reason to go beyond that. Same thing with timing. If I go from 25 to 27 and we see a gain, and I go from 27 to 29, I see a very tiny gain, and then I go to 30 and I don't see any gain, there's no reason for me to go to 36. It's not going to go from making power and then making very little power and then making no power to making, a whole bunch of power. That's not the way internal combustion engines work. And so you learn stuff like that, but it does take time to do all that. So what's going on with James? He can't see it? So where are we at? No, the tune isn't always to blame, 78%. Do you run wasted spark? We do on some motors. Yeah, yeah, Dan, I agree. I get that from the super tuners that know everything. Oh, you should let me come tune that. I'm like, again, I have to backpedal a little bit and tell them I'm not a tuner. So I'm not going to argue with a guy that tunes for a living. But what he doesn't know is he was never at the dyno. knows nothing about the motor, knows nothing about the things that we went through to tune it and what we tried and what we didn't try. He just knows that all of the little minions that follow him are like, oh yeah, you should have him do it because he's the guy, because he tunes this and this and this, whatever they rattle off some kind of things that, you know, I don't care about. But because he has that sort of following, they tell him that, yeah, he can tune it. And then I tell him, look, I've swept the air fuel from 13.2 down to 11.2. And I've swept the timing from 22 to 32. There's nothing that you're going to come in and change in any of that, you know, that box. You're not going to be able to make anything. The only thing you could do is come in and try injector timing or whatever kind of magic thing that you want to try. Air fuel and timing is like 99% of it. And then the other little things could be more. I'm watching this video on my Fire Stick and texting on my YouTube phone app. Okay. ECU flashing is big business. Yeah, I don't want to. I'm not interested in that. I'd like to sign up early for the next car giveaway. Can we make it next one a Nova 2? That'd be clever. Yeah, yeah, I agree. Doe 8. Drivability is where the tuning is. It is. That's where the transitions are and the gear and all of the magic tuning part of it is. It has nothing to do like the wide open throttle stuff. I can do in about 5 pulls. And then it's not gonna. You're not gonna see any change after that. All of the other magic stuff. That's all. That's why I tell people if I'm not a tuner that you don't want me doing that. Mike, I need to watch that video of the lawnmower engine putting a lawnmower carburetor on there and getting 41 miles to the gallon. I don't know how that's possible, knowing what I know about carburetors and internal combustion engines. I don't see how that's possible. Why would that carburetor improve fuel mileage and deliver some amount of fuel less than another carburetor that you could make it do that? You could make any carburetor deliver less fuel. So why would that carburetor do that and not another carburetor? Why would the carburetor improve the fuel mileage? Somebody needs to explain that to me. Somebody was talking about Don. I don't need to ask David about 5.7 intake porting. I don't need to ask him about that. I'm pretty familiar with it. My statement, regardless of whether David would agree with it or anybody else would agree with it, if you take 2 intake runners, one's longer and one's shorter, and you port them and make them flow the same, they're still going to require different amounts of fuel. And those cylinders are still going to make different power. Doesn't have anything to do with porting. It has to do with a reflected wave. And so that will not change. No other person in the industry can tell me that that's not the case, because I know that it's not. And everybody else knows that it's not too. Basically, just the laws of physics know that it's not. I think I read GM put a bunch of effort into encrypting the upcoming C8 Z06 EC to prevent it from being tuned. They did that with the older ZR1 and stuff too. That took them a long time. And Dodge has been doing it. I mean, every year they try to make it more and more difficult, obviously, because they don't want people getting in there. So just for clarification, 5.3 with a 317 lower compression would produce less horsepower off boost, but on 91 be able to put in more boost without detonation. I don't know that. I know what you're asking, and people have asked that a lot. I don't know that that's the case. I don't know what the detonation threshold is of a 317 head with more timing and or boost versus a 799 or a 706 head with more compression, and then its combination of boost and timing to get to some detonation threshold on 91. I don't know which one of those is more. I don't have that answer because I don't have knock detection that would tell me that. And it would take a lot of testing because you'd have to figure out if you were going for the most amount, which seems to be what guys are interested in. If you're going for the most amount, you'd have to try some combination of, like, if you had the 317 heads on there, you have to try some combination of reduced timing and more boost wherever, because you tried more timing and less boost and then less timing and more boost on the 317 head. Which combination of that is going to produce the most power at that detonation threshold? And then the same thing on the other higher compression version, which combination of that, maybe you knock a bunch of timing out of it and then run lots of boost, whatever that combination is. Once you tried each of those, then I don't know how, because you're talking about different things for each one of those, then I don't know how those two things compare. I would love to see that, and I would love to test that, but I'm almost thinking that has to be done on kind of a production deal on a chassis dyno, which then I question the ability to make it repeatable anyway. Can the aluminum LM4 handle as much power as the LM7? What is the LM4? Multiple lawnmower carbs are required. Small carbs run rich, and his ECU alters the air leak. So it's the same as the LM7, just aluminum. So is it like an LC9 or an L33? I don't know what are the best $1,000 small block Chevy heads. I've not tested a lot of the low dollar ones. I think I would feel comfortable with the AFR Enforcers, but I don't know how much they are. I think, does TrickFlow have a head that's in that range also? So is an LM4 like an L33 then? If that's the case, you can run 1,000,000 horsepower with those. The LM4 is the LM7, but it's not aluminum. To answer the question he just addressed, I personally have recently tested this theory to an extent anyway, as a bone stock bottom end 5.3 I ran with 862 heads and 91 pump gas. So what did that test? Did that test which one runs under boost? And did you test different timing levels versus different boost levels? AC Delco, I don't think you're going to be, I think you would be happier with the 799 heads driving around for most of the time. I think if there was going to be a difference between those two things, I think it's going to come down more to tuning, and you're going to be able to make a pretty good bit of power with either one of those combinations. Daniel, then I swapped over to the 317 head, same boost level, unless I was able to get away with 4 degrees more timing, same fuel, same everything. I know it's not definitive proof. So you had 862 heads on it, and you had 91 on it, and then you swapped on 317 heads, and you're able to run 4 degrees more timing, the same fuel. So the amount of fuel that you didn't change, so was the power the same then? Was the air fuel the same? So I'm just trying to figure out which one of those made more power. Did you run them on the chassis dyno, or did you just run them on the street? The LM7 is definitely a 5.3 aluminum armor iron block. I've tested Pro Max a couple of times, and I've tested on the big block, their big block heads, and I tested their small block Ford heads, I think, and both of those work really good. The LS4 is definitely a front wheel drive, but it's a different motor though. Front wheel drive, 60-degree trans pattern, and no starter provision in the block. The LM4 comes on all-wheel drive SUVs. I've compared in the past. I've compared 862 or 706 heads to 317 heads back to back, NA and turbocharged at the same boost. And the 706 heads make more power NA than the 317 head does. Not surprising. It's a pretty big jump in compression. It's about a 10 cc change in chamber size, and the 317 isn't a good chamber design. The 706 head's a pretty good chamber design also. So it's not just size. Also, you have a change in flow and valve size and coefficient of discharge and all that. So there was definitely more power from the 5.3 head. And then when we ran it under boost, there's still more power at the same boost level. That doesn't tell us about limiting it. I think we only ran 7 or 8 pounds or something. That doesn't tell us what happens if we limit the amount of timing that we can run based on octane. And I haven't done that test, and I would like to see that. So can we not run 7 pounds of boost at 20 degrees of timing, whatever we're running? Can we not do that on pump gas? And can we get away with doing that with the 317 heads? Because the first thing that's going to have to happen when you're doing that comparison is the 317 head is going to make less power. So it has to make up that power. And then is there enough of a difference in the detonation threshold that you allow it to surpass that? Because you had to pull so much timing out of the higher compression deal that now the 317 not only is it level with the smaller head, can it now make more power with that detonation threshold? It's a difficult test, and I've never been able to do it. Look at the time. Man, people are kind of going off on this cat thing. That's why I don't run them on the engine dyno. So we're going to shut off our poll for tonight. Is the tune always to blame? 79% saying no. I thought it was, though. It must be the gas cap. Daniel, the other thing that I saw with the 317 head is it wants more timing than the other heads. It wants a degree or two more timing to make peak power at. Bigger, not surprisingly, bigger chamber and a different chamber design. Yep, Terry, there was a poll. I was very cool that somebody reached out, and whoever did it, thank you very much. I don't have your name here, but he reached out and actually gave me some dyno results from I think that this was maybe like Chrysler stuff. Gave me dyno results of factory Turbo 2, the 2.2 liter turbo stuff. So it gave me not only traces of the power curves, what they look like from, wow, they loaded it down at 1500 RPM and ran it all the way out to 55 or 5600 RPM. Yeah, they're showing 55. So it shows me the boost curve and the horsepower and the torque curve. And to me, that's like awesome information, because it shows me what's happening with the turbo, how the thing's spooling up. I need to find out. I need to send him a message and make sure that this is definitely engine dyno stuff. It's got to be, given this power level. I like the fact that it's showing the boost curve. And the interesting thing is, and it always seems to happen like this, that because I was curious on the turbo stuff. For those of the guys that don't know, and I've got to get going. On the Dodge stuff, the early one, like the 84 that I have, was just controlled, just had a wastegate reference line, basically. It was just mechanically controlled. And then in 85, they had computer controlled, changing the boost pressure based on detonation, and the computer's controlling the boost curve. And then they introduced like overboost situation, where that for a short period of time, they would allow the turbo to make more boost than the rating number. Like the 7 PSI versions would go to 9 PSI, and then the 11 PSI versions, the 9 PSIs would go to 11 PSI or something. So they would allow them a little bit more boost for a short period of time, and then they had timers on them. And then so you could run that higher boost for this period of time, basically kind of 1/4 mile run or whatever. And then for every amount of time that you were off boost, it would add that ability to go back into that higher boost. But my question is, after seeing all this, which is very cool, especially for the period of time that it was, my question is, one, was the power rating of the motor, was it rated at that higher boost level? And the answer is no, actually, because if you look at the boost curve on this factory one, like most factory turbo combinations that I've seen, they have falling boost curves. So it has the highest boost level near the torque peak, and then it falls off at the horsepower peak. And now, obviously, the horsepower is still climbing, because even on a falling power or torque curve, you have a rising horsepower curve. It's not rising as fast as you want it to be. If they had a nice flat boost curve and the torque curve extended out a little bit further, you'd have a steeper climb on the horsepower curve. But it gives me lots of information, and I can discern a lot of that stuff from dyno curves, having looked at them for the last 3 decades or so. It's really cool stuff, and that's the stuff that I like. Those little things are the things that I want to look at when I run the 2.2 and the 2.5 motors on the engine dyno. I'm interested in little stuff. Most of the guys are interested. Oh, you need to make 500 horsepower, 600 horsepower, 900 horsepower, whatever the number is. All of that's great. This kind of stuff, like how much different is it if we were just be able to get the thing to have a flat boost curve? How is it if we're just able to run, like one of the questions I had is, okay, if you have access to any of this information, can you show me what the factory timing curve is on one of these things? When everything is right, what is the factory timing curve? Like, what is it under boost? How much timing does it have? I want to see stuff like that, because I want to know if they're yanking a bunch of timing out of it. And what happens if we put, even with the factory boost level, if we put E85 in it, we are able to run like, you know, the knock sensor never goes off when we're able to run full timing. Does it still do that, or is it taking timing based on boost? And since we have control of this, running an aftermarket ECU on here, when we run the 2.2 or the 2.5 on there, I can make the timing be whatever I want. But I'd like to know what the factory one is, so I can first duplicate that and duplicate that timing curve, the factory boost curve, and even, I don't know how I'm going to get it to fall off though. That's going to be another trick. And I want to have it restricted from the inlet side and restricted from the exhaust side and all that stuff, so I can kind of get an idea where I'm starting at a completely stock one. And then we can go, okay, look, now here's what we would do if we were running it cold on E85 and we put all the timing in it, and then we'd start out with low boost, and then on the non-intercooled ones, we'd run an intercooler and yada, 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 and all that stuff. So all of that's like really neat stuff to me. Daniel, so the seat of the pants didn't really feel that much different. Yeah, it has a fairly good amount of power that has to make up before it even equal the power of the other one. And the other thing is that and we talked about this before when I was talking about cylinder heads. The reality is any factory head on an LS is good. And any factory head on the LS, if you have the head gasket sealed and you have the timing right and all that stuff, and you put a turbo on it, you're going to make as much power as you need. All of those are stock heads, or all of those are 1,000 horsepower heads. And so it really is one. If one is a little bit better, even if one is a little bit better, it's not going to make any more on the 1,000 horsepower turbo if all of them will make 1,000 horsepower. So you can get there. One of them would have a better boost response or whatever, and those kinds of things. But, you know, really, there's none of those are a losing situation. No, factory GM drivetrain is ready for a factory turbo LS. It does take a lot. Although what's the drivetrain in the ZR1? Those guys have been making lots of power, right? Port heads for a centrifugal blower, the same mentality as a turbo. Yeah, I would be more inclined to make the NA power output better on a centrifugal blower application. And I would especially be concerned with more low speed power on a centrifugal blower application, because it's going to be soft down low. Cameron, if you put E85 in an older carbureted car, how would it run leaving the gas station? It depends on how it went going in. Was it really rich going in? Was it really lean? If it was really lean going in and you put E85, it might stumble and not run. If it was really rich going in, it'd be a little bit better, because it would have more fuel flowing in, which is it's going to need that. It's going to need 25 or 30% more fuel going in. With E85 going from E85 from like 91 or 87 or something to E85. It might still drive, but it's going to be leaner. In Australia, we have the Gen 3 M90. I love your turbo NSC. Ours was north-south mount, not east. So yeah, the rear-wheel drive stuff is kind of nice in Australia. I do like the 3800, and we have that in the Camaro and the Firebird, but never in the Supercharged configuration. Okay, 2 more minutes. I'm interested in putting, and somebody brought up an M90. I'm interested in putting an M90 on a 6-cylinder. Maybe I'm deciding between I think I know which one I'm going to go with. I'm deciding between the 292 6-cylinder and the slant 6. I'm leaning toward the slant 6 because I like the intake manifold better on the slant 6. I like that it has individual runners, which I could put either fuel injection on, or the other thing I'm thinking about doing is putting a carburetor where the throttle body is on the M90 and just running it and running fuel through it to kind of see what happens. Twin M90s remote through an intercooler. So the Slant 6 would be, I think, the better choice. Like I said, I just like the intake better. LS3 with 700 horsepower goal, stock cam plus boost, or BTR stage 2 plus less boost for better mile per gallon wood. My foot isn't in it. There's much better camshafts in the LS3 for fuel mileage. I don't think that that's a great choice. But I don't know about the fuel mileage thing. I would not lean toward a stage 2. I would lean toward something that's smaller, and the boost is going to easily make 700 horsepower. I ran a 91 TBI Chevy on E85. Didn't like it, and I didn't care. Yeah, we could. The Slant 6, Dan, could have really long runners. I have one of the Australian manifolds for that, and they make an Australia, the Aussie Speed makes a blower manifold for that. I don't want to hit them up for that, but I want to put one of these junkyard M90s on one of these inline 6-cylinders. What turbo size for 100% stock 88 vet for 5 to 7 pounds? Your 350 is like 250 horsepower, something like that. So it's because that's gonna be an L98, and so a GT45 would be more than enough for that. The Chevy I have is a 292, that inline 6-cylinder. The next, yeah, I do have a big project coming up. I'm going down to do more testing pretty soon here. What oil pumps you use in a Gen 3? We use stock ones, or you can also we've also put some high volume things in there when I'm running turbos on them. I ran the 292 with the turbo already. I can't get the Holley Hyperspark to work on a Mopar. Can't get the distributor fire on Hyperspark setting. It's giving me a signal on magnetic, but not on Hyperspark. What mods are done to the stock oil pumps? You can port them to make them flow more. Cameron, so you'd have to jet up for E85 or anything with timing. Yeah, the E85, we did that on, as a matter of fact, we did that on the 292 inline 6-cylinder. I ran the what is it, the 5512, the 2-barrel XP version of the carburetor that they run on all of the 2-barrel roundy round classes. So I ran that 2-barrel with an adapter on the factory intake manifold on the 292, and then we blew through that carburetor. We made it a blower a blow through carburetor, which it's not. And the way that I did that is, and we ran E85 with it. The way that I did it is I just put 90 or 100 jets in it, and then we just ran it like that. And the air fuel was actually fairly good. Michael, I'm glad you're here learning. That's good. I have an 05 V6 Silverado. Is there a manifold? There's not going to be a dedicated manifold for that. You'd have to make it or make an adapter. I don't know about turbo kits, Kyre. I don't know about turbo kits specifically for different like chassis applications. I always make my own. Dan, I'm not familiar with Cotton Perry's Chevy 6-cylinder. Does anybody try a BTR lifter tray? If Brian made or sourced lifter trays, they're going to be good. He's the real deal. He knows what he's doing. That's literally the turbo I've got on my 2JZ. It's a good turbo. E85 burns cleaner. Do I get points for that? Yeah, that's right. Okay, one more question. People are still caught up on there. Okay, here we go. Brandon, 6.2 LS at 700 horsepower twin GT 35s. That would be kind of cool because it would look cool. Or 7875. It depends. That choice really is going to depend on what you're packaging that in. I don't know what chassis it is. So one of those combinations is going to be easier to fit. They'll both do that power level. In fact, for 700 horsepower, I might not pick the twin GT35s. I might pick twin 3076s, pick the even smaller ones, because they'll easily do that. Is turbo flutter really bad for a turbo? Yeah, it's telling you that it's unhappy and then it could come apart. That's what happens when we run them without blow-off valves. Did you see Power Nation's crank link big block Chevy on the engine dyno? I saw a photo of it, but I haven't seen the video. Do you want a falling boost curve on a street car? Most of the factories are programmed in like that, but whether you want it or not is up to you. I like rising curves or flat curves, but like I said, most of the factory ones are not like that. Steven, if you have a 4.8, the thing that I would be worried about is ring gap on that. Otherwise, you can run a lot of boost. What kind of fuel are you running it on? Richard, I imagine a tool done with intake and exhaust valves for solution piston to valve clearance. I'm doing a piston to valve clearance video, but any sort of piston to valve clearance measurement is going to require, some sort of measuring tool. What EC would you recommend for the Supercharged 3800? Like I said, the only ones I have any experience with are Fast and Holly and Mega Squirt. Kyer, I don't drink wine. Bobby, thank you very much. Richard, have you ever built a sequential turbo? I haven't built a sequential turbo LS. It's pretty complicated plumbing with valves and stuff, so it's a little harder to do. Yeah, flutters, compressor surge. It's that nice high pressure wave coming back and with a really high spinning impeller blade trying to stop it in mid-flight. They don't like doing that. Perry, I said piston to valve clearance. I know what you're talking about. Measuring piston to valve clearance requires spinning the motor over and checking the valve clearance, usually on the intake on an LS. I check it at different positions, but I think somebody put up there it was 10 or 15 degrees. We do 10 before and 10 after normally. But I like sweeping it through that range. What's the difference between sequential and compound? Sequential is all the exhaust feeding in one turbo and not the other one until it spools up, and then exhaust going into the other turbo, or sometimes into both. Sequential PD blower to turbo would be cool. So like they did on the Lancia. But then you have to stop or bypass the blower, and then you're also driving the blower unless you clutched it. Again, it's just a lot of, for like the average person, it's a lot of work. Do dish pistons have more clearance? We had that on a poll the other night, and on an LS they don't. A dish LS piston doesn't have any more clearance than the flat top does, because the valve intersects. The dish isn't the whole diameter of the piston. It's only in the center, and it has an outer edge that's all flat. That's flat top on the outer edge. Unfortunately, the piston intersects with that flat outer edge, and so it doesn't really do anything for you. Yeah, nitrous helps. Definitely helps spool. Okay, guys, I got to get going. Thank you guys all for showing up. If you haven't already, as always, go check out the video that I just put up on 900 horsepower big block combinations, NA, supercharged, and turbocharged, because variety is the spice of life. Thanks, guys. I will see you all tomorrow.